Okay, and now I'm open for questions. I'm told you must speak into the microphone, or I will not listen to you.
Thank you so much for the exposition. It was quite interesting. If someone wants to make a question.
Thank you very much, Susan. Just about...
Can you hear it? It's okay. They can hear it back there.
It's because of the streaming.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? No.
Yeah, he gave a thumbs up.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. It's about methodology.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, how did parents react to the experiments? Because you said the sample was randomized, so there could be students assigned to any of the groups, but the parents didn't have any decision to make there. So how did they react?
So first of all, in general, assignment to classes, parents formally don't have control over class assignments, but you're probably familiar with the pushy parent syndrome, right? So in fact, many of you might be pushy parents, right? If you're in this room, you probably are, because you know how important it is, right? So this is one of the hardest parts of a randomized trial, is maintaining compliance. Right, so guess what? The parents of the children who were assigned to the regular size classes were displeased. And resisting pressure to move children is a big part of maintaining the integrity of a study like this. That said, what happened was after the first year, the kindergarten year, the analysts looked at the test scores of children in the three groups. Now I focused on the regular versus small, but remember there were three groups. There was regular size plus a teaching assistant, and small. When they looked at the numbers at the end of kindergarten, the first year of the program, they saw no difference based on whether the class had an assistant or not. So the teaching aide, who was an unskilled aide, this was like, not a person with a college degree, it was somebody to help with making copies, wiping kids' noses, this kind of thing, sort of helping out a bit with childcare in the classroom. No effect. So they said at that point, okay, it doesn't appear there's any effect of this. Let's use this as a way to placate the parents. And they re-randomized. So every child who was in a regular or regular aid, there was a coin flip saying, next year you're going to get the They didn't tell the parents there's no effect of a teacher's aid. They said, you could get it, you have the possibility of getting a teacher's aid. And they re-randomized. So that was done to sort of help with the politics. It also means that you can now only compare regular and small because the randomization got rid of the aid. The other thing, which I didn't show you, everything I've shown you here is the intention to treat, which is the effect of being assigned to a small class in kindergarten. If you focus on what's the effect of actually being in a small class on test scores, you need to use a more sophisticated method. Instrumental variables is the method we use in the paper. You instrument for the number of years spent in a small class on outcomes, and this is what I skipped. That was dosage. So you've got non-compliance. Some of the kids assigned to a regular class actually ended up in a small class. Yada yada. Also, you've got that some kids leave the study. They moved out of Tennessee. You can't make them stay in the state, right? Or children moved into the school, right? So there's various sources of noncompliance. If you look at the effect of spending an additional year in a small class, that's these estimates here. These are the two-stage least squares estimates. And each year in a small class for blacks increases college enrollment by 2.4 percentage points. For whites, basically nothing. So this is the method that you can use to back out the effect of the treatment on the treated. And that's how you can deal with, as long as initially you've got random assignment, you can deal with noncompliance.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. So I've got two questions. One is, I hope I understood your models correctly. Since you have fixed effects on the school, right, effect?
School
so
by
I was wondering
if
you could tell us how much of the school heterogeneity over the long run is the class effect, the class size effect able to explain? So how much of the school effect over the long run is the class effect able to reduce, to shrink?
It would be a great
actually?
statistics to know, and I don't know. I mean, we can kind of actually back that out a little bit by looking at this, right? So we can see that in the high poverty schools, 26% of the children in the larger classes go to college, and in the low poverty, 48%. So we've got a gap of 22 percentage points between this. I think I'm doing what you say, right? I'm comparing what's college going in the poorest schools versus in the least poor schools. And what we do is we increase college going by 7 percentage points in the poorest schools. So it sounds like it's reducing the gap by 1/3.
Yeah, so this is like reducing the part of the school heterogeneity that is due to the composition or like the weight of poverty in the student body, right?
Yes.
So my question was, regarding like the overall school heterogeneity over the long run. If, for instance, instead of modeling these equations with a fixed effect, you model it with a random slope.
Yeah.
Sorry, with a random
Yeah.
constant, whether
Right.
you could see a shrink over, like, because this is so important, because in the school effects
Yeah.
literature, there's this
So
argument
this
that...
is, I mean, this is, you're
Exactly.
talking about a continuous, use all the variation.
Exactly.
I'm just chunking it up.
Exactly.
So there's only 80 schools,
Right.
right? So I've divided this into, 25, 25, 25. You can't get too much smaller than this, but I could do that. I haven't done it.
Right.
I predict it's about 1/3, that it
Wow.
reduces the difference across schools by about 1/3, is my prediction. I haven't actually run that regression.
Right. And then just a comment on the interpretation of your results in this final graph showing the costs. I understand that, of course, there's this choice for cheaper or more expensive programs, but then where I think that Heckman and his colleagues are still right is that in terms of if equity is a concern, then the most efficient the most efficient intervention is in early childhood, right? In the first stages of life, because in the type of interventions that are cheaper, then you have these students that are already selected, right? They only need the final push to jump into college, but if you want to recuperate those that are probably going to fade out or have a small educational survival.
Yep.
Then the only realistic option and also economically efficient is a very early intervention, right?
So there's two. No, well, it doesn't. Your argument might make sense for compulsory versus non-compulsory school.
Exactly.
Right? So, looking past the age of compulsory school, you're going to be losing people. But the Heckman argument is usually said preschool
Exactly.
is where it needs to be. And what we're looking at is in here.
Right.
And then there are, I think you had Josh Angrist here, my co-author, earlier this year talking about high schools, right, which are up here. Right? And so we found very effective programs in high schools as well. Right? So agreed. Though to make a point, this FAFSA experiment included many adults who had finished secondary school years ago but never went to college. And part of what it did was get those people to go try college. So these are some people in here in particular who would have been lost to the system otherwise. But your point is taken.
Thank you.
Yes, I would like to ask you if you have an interpretation for the result that you get that the impact of class size, of a reduced class size on test scores fade out, and then how is that later on you get an impact different on college attendance or even to degree attendance. So
Yep.
how it's
Yep.
a strange
And just to be
issue.
clear, I'm not, a whole bunch of studies, including the Abecedarian, the Head Start, have found this effect. So here I have to, I'm stepping outside of my randomized trial and I'm hypothesizing. So what's consistent with what we see here? It's consistent with, when the children are in the intensive setting, they're in a smaller class, they work harder on their standardized tests. We're in a small class, we're getting more attention from our teacher, and therefore we work harder on the test. And then when we go back into our regular size classes, they're not working as hard. They still learned more, but children actually have to try on the test in order to show results on the test. So there have been some recent experiments John List, I think, and Steve Levitt at Chicago did some work in high schools in Chicago. And there were two experiments they were working on. One was quite intensive, and it started at the beginning of high school, and it was coaching, and it was mentoring, and it was tutoring, and they were looking at the effect on outcomes. And then they did another one in parallel, where they, on the day of the standardized test, they told the kids, if you get a certain score, we'll give you $25. And the latter one had a much stronger effect. I mean, the estimate, like the increases were like half of a standard deviation in test scores. Enormous. This is enough to, give psychometricians a heart attack, right? So child effort, guess what, makes a difference. So the idea that variation, these are identical children, right? Some of them got this incentive and some did not, and the effect on their test scores was half a standard deviation. So that suggests that the child volition, the child willingness to participate in the test makes a difference. So if in a smaller class, the teacher gives more attention to the child, knows the child, encourages the child, you could see there being a bigger impact of that child's knowledge on the score. So that is consistent with what I'm showing here, but maybe some of you have a different hypothesis of what's consistent here. The other hypothesis is that the smaller classes are increasing not only test scores, but something else. This is what, grit, non-cognitive skills is what economists have been calling it. Again, that's something that gives psychologists a heart attack to call something a non-cognitive skill, but it's basically everything but test scores. The thing is, what we showed, it looks like the test score increase we see at the beginning predicts what we're going to see in college later on. So it doesn't, we don't have any measure of these children's grit or their patience, or you're probably familiar with the marshmallow test, right? These children did not go through the marshmallow test. So we don't know what happened to these kids psychologically. But one hypothesis that is consistent with the data is that basically in the presence of a more intensive intervention, smaller classes, the kids work harder on the tests. And then when the time comes when they're adults to make high-stakes decisions, so these tests are not high stakes. These did not matter for going to college, for getting into a good middle school. They were just tests that were administered over the course of the school year. So maybe they don't matter a whole lot. But when it came time to make decisions that actually mattered for life, am I going to go to college? Am I going to finish college? Then the effect of the intervention comes out again. A high-stakes decision, whatever human capital the smaller classes had created, at that point made a difference. You're taking questions on Twitter? No?
I have another question. Is that it may have the fact that schools did voluntarily participate in the program, and if you have, you have shown us comparisons between the control group and the treatment group.
Yep.
But do you have the results of other schools in Tennessee that did not participate?
We do not. We do not. So what you ask is a question of external validity, right? So, the random assignment was actually within schools. So here's this school. Children are randomly assigned to one of 3 classes. So the assignment was not across schools. It was within schools. But the question is, what are these 79 schools? Are they weird schools? Are they representative of the rest of the state? They had to be large enough to have 3 classes. So if they're larger than usual, they tend to be urban classes, because you need, in a rural area, you wouldn't have, 3 classes. So they appear, other people have looked at this more closely, they appear to be representative of urban areas in Tennessee. But they're not strange in any other way that we can tell. But this is, this is the, you can't force anybody to be in an experiment. They need to volunteer. But you work hard to make sure that your volunteers represent the population you care about. Can somebody ask questions besides Ismail? He's going to ask all the questions if you don't ask them. No?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, then Professor Dynarski, thank you so much for coming to Madrid. It has been really interesting, and I think it's very useful for us, this information for the Ministry of Education. So thank you so much for coming, and
Thank you for having me.
congratulations for
It's an honor to
the
be here.
seminar.